Hi, my name is Dr. Edward D. Miller. I'm the coordinator of the Certificate Program in Film and Media Cultures at the Graduate Center of the City University of New York. Welcome to CUNY TV Presents, an initiative focusing on emerging filmmakers and the exceptional cinema they create. Today's conversation focuses on filmmakers who teach or study at the Graduate Center, featuring a recent graduate from the MA in Liberal Studies program and 2 faculty members. You're about to watch a collection of outstanding films made by folks who are affiliated with the Graduate Center. Today's show follows upon an event entitled GC Filmmakers, organized by Fernando Vieira, whose work is included in this group of films. My hope is to introduce you to work made by scholars who are also important filmmakers. Natalie, introduce yourself.
I am Nathalie Etoke. I'm a professor of Francophone and Africana Studies at the Graduate Center CUNY, and I teach Francophone and Africana Studies. And I'm here as a filmmaker to discuss Afro-diasporic French identities, a documentary film that I directed a few years ago. And I'm very excited, looking forward to the conversation.
David, introduce yourself.
I'm David Gerstner. I'm a professor of cinema studies at the City University of New York at the College of Staten Island. And also, I am on the doctoral faculty at the Graduate Center, where I teach in the Film Studies Certificate program. My film, Between Men, a Historical Fantasy, is a reimagined meeting that took place between Francois Truffaut and Jean Genet in 1951.
And Fernando, please introduce yourself and tell us about your connection with the CUNY Graduate Center.
Hi, my name is Fernando Vieira. I'm a multidisciplinary artist, filmmaker, theater director, and performer. My film, Frenetic Journey to Immortalness, is an experimental film inspired by the work of queer avant-garde artists such as Kenneth Anger. The film is about a person who undergoes a disturbing mental journey which takes them from the present to the past in a bewildered ride.
Natalie, you directed Afro-diasporic French identities. What is it about?
It's about race and citizenship in France. I know when I say that it sounds pretty obvious because we're in the United States, but coming from France is actually an abomination to connect race to citizenship or to try to start a conversation about race and citizenship. Because as you know, French people and the French Republic, they claim a universal ideal. They talk about universalism. Basically, we are all French. Your gender, your sexuality, your race are supposed to be irrelevant. But your lived experience constantly challenges whatever stories you hear about liberty, equality, and fraternity, which is the French motto. And particularly when it comes down to people of African descent, how do they become part of France? They're actually part of the French Empire. So you have the history of slavery, colonization, immigration that creates a tension and a conflict. But unlike the United States, where the segregation was on paper and also everything happened on the mainland, you have to realize that in the French context, people come from the former French Empire. So you can come from Guadeloupe, Martinique, Ivory Coast, Senegal, or Cameroon. So you know where you come from, you have an ethnicity. But once you arrive in France, you become part of a minority and you become black. So you're always black in front of the white people who don't think of themselves as white. So I'm trying to address the conundrums and the paradoxes of belonging and exclusion in the context of France.
And how did you compile and gather together all of these very amazing people that populate this film?
Well, it was words of mouth and also connection. So I talked to a lot of people. Some of those people, I've read their work. Some of those people are already well-known at the time because of their activism. But remember, that was in 2012. Back then, it wasn't that trendy to have the opportunity to have someone who genuinely want to understand what you have to say instead of attacking you or criticizing you for bringing up race. Now it's more common to have those conversations, but back then people were also thirsty for a space where they could speak. And knowing that I was also coming from the US, although I had connections in France, there was a certain kind of trust that was there also, right? So if someone like Rokhaya Diallo was already on TV. She was an activist. Someone like Franco was an activist. So I reached out to them through several Facebook, words of mouth, or Alexis Peskin. I met him here when he was on a Fulbright scholarship. He's a painter, and he gave me some of those people's names. That's how it works. It was really community work, but it happened randomly. It's not like I had a plan and I knew these people, and they didn't know me either. But I think there was a trust right there, and also the realization that I wasn't going to use whatever they're going to say against them. I was trying to center their voices. As a matter of fact, you don't see me in that documentary.
No.
J'ai grandi en France, j'ai toujours vécu ici, je parle français, j'aime la France, c'est mon pays. Mais la Guinée-Bissau, c'est le seul pays, c'est le seul endroit où je me sens vraiment chez moi.
La couleur noire, pour l'Antillais, ne signifie pas qu'il est africain.
C'est cette même volonté d'asseoir et de lester l'histoire des Antillais ailleurs qu'en Afrique, même si l'Afrique en est la terre première, la matière première. Nous n'avons pas la même histoire, nous n'avons pas le même mode de vie, nous n'avons pas le même repère, les mêmes manières de regarder le monde.
David, tell us about your film.
Well, it's just really interesting listening to Natalie talk about the process of making her film, and I hear many echoes in terms of the process, particularly the friendships that get developed around the making and the intimacy. But my film is an imaginary reenactment, I guess, of Francois Truffaut and Jean Genet's meeting in 1951. Francois Truffaut had written a very admiring letter to Genet, telling him how much he loved his novel, A Thief's Journal. He wrote him an essay adoring him and so on and so forth. So Genet said, let's invite this cute young guy to my apartment in the Hotel Terrasse in Paris. And they met. And so there's no documentation about the actual meeting, but at the same time, both were thinking about cinema and literature. They were both very much involved in the question of reading. They're all reading Balzac. Truffaut's reading Genet, and how to think about how cinema can come from that. So the meeting was sort of an imaginary encounter between those two men.
What do your versions of Genet and Truffaut represent?
Well, I'd been studying both of them for so many years. Truffaut since the early 80s, and Genet, I did a pretty rigorous study in the past 10, 15 years. And it just became really interesting to me, their connections, and they became close friends. What I wanted to explore with these two men, one who is known to be very straight, Truffaut, and one who was very homosexual and out about that, Jean Genet, and what that encounter between these two men might feel like and look like. So I was very interested in how to not necessarily engage them just with their intellectual back and forth, which they had, because they love to talk about ideas, but what happened when we got them into this very confined room, and what's the feeling, the experience they had between the two of them? The adoration, the discomfort, an older guy, a younger guy, one who was clearly smitten with the other, and the other smitten with the other in a very different way. What did that feel like? So I was very interested in that historical moment as something more than just these two very famous people talking about literature and film. What went on? What was the frisson that these two had on set?
I imagine it's quite different from the romanticized movie versions that the uninitiated dream up, if you know what I mean. Last year, I was asked to write the film dialogue for the adaptation of the German novel, The Novel of the Prisoner, by Hans Fallada. The director thought that I was the right person to make his film a success because I spoke prison. His intentions were too earnest. He considered my reputation, my thieving, would make his film more real.
It's odd that he thinks you write as a realist. The Thief's Journal is simply overwhelming. For the cinema to equal literariness like in your writing, it must be...
Moral?
Well, yes. Cinema depends on realism, but cinematic realism. It combines words and poetic insights, much like Cocteau.
Cocteau, the moralist.
Fernando, tell us about your film and what motivated you to make it.
Well, my film, I actually started working on it in the year 2010. That's a very long time ago. And it had a different title. The title at the time when I wrote it was Fatalistic Exit. And I wanted to make a film about, so I knew it needed to be experimental because I didn't have budget. And as we know, doing things experimentally gives you a certain leeway to just create things that do not necessarily have to have top-notch quality, but more of an artistic vision. So I had this vision of creating an ambiguous story. But then unfortunately, I couldn't finish it. Life happened. I just didn't edit it, but I saved it. And I said, well, sometime later, if I'm alive, I will finish it. And then it so happens that I was here at the Graduate Center and I was able to digitize the material. And all of a sudden I said, wait a minute, I can do something else with it. And the original story really, I didn't care for it anymore. And I was like, let me do something else. I've changed. People change. So I said, what can I do with this footage that it's not the greatest, in my opinion, but I can make it look good? So I said, I don't like the sound. The sound wasn't so great. So that's how it ended up becoming a silent film. I said, I like the footage, but I think I'm gonna make it more into silent. And I'm into silent films anyway. So to me, it was sort of like a cool thing to have, you know, why not do a little silent film? But I also wanted it to have some sound. So it's a semi-silent. And then I added that footage to something else I had done as a performer, as I had done a monologue. So then I decided to combine images and see what comes up with it, you know, and then based on the images that were put together, I said, okay, I see a correlation here and there. And the title was going to be Snippets, because I felt like I was putting snippets from here and there. And then finally, I said, no, that's not really what it is. And I said, what is it? There's something about this film. And I was like, it is a journey. It's a mental journey. But it is sort of crazy, ambiguous, frenetic. So that's how it ended up becoming Frenetic Journey Toward Muddledness.
As queer filmmakers, as people who are New Yorkers, but also have had experiences and have lived in places other than New York, how does that impact your filmmaking?
I grew up in Buffalo, New York,
I know, yeah.
What's interesting to me when I think about the two filmmakers that were important for this film, Vincent Minnelli and Christophe Honoré, both of them came from outside of a major city. They were queer, and then they make their way to like, Minnelli goes to New York, Honoré goes to Paris, I go to New York, and you know, the New York, I was just thinking about what you were saying, this kind of loneliness. It's a loneliness I kind of thrive on though, and I think that because there's an energy in the loneliness. There's something we have to do to survive in it, and so when I even think about my film, you know, it's like, it's a lonely world. You know, it's a closed world, it's a sad world, but there's an energy that goes on, and in that energy, something gets created. There's movement, there's I guess the word I've used before, but frisson, and I like this. I like that I don't need to think of loneliness as a negative, but as in fact as a prompt to drive. So that's been important for me, thinking through how I live in the city in that way.
Great. And Natalie, how would you respond to that question?
Well, I'm not queer in terms of my sexual identity, but I claim queerness in terms of methodology, meaning dislocating identities, disrupting the peace. And I think blackness in many ways is queer in the Western Hemisphere. Because if I go to Cameroon and start talking about that, nobody will understand what I'm talking about. But in terms of your positionality, I think there's something about disrupting discourses and how the black body in the Western world create a certain kind of disruption. And it becomes these antagonizing figures against which whiteness basically projects a lot of discourses in terms of identities, sexualities, etc. So when I'm teaching or when I'm working on a film, I'm constantly trying to dislocate whatever we think we know about people that we've been putting in boxes for centuries. Mm-hmm. And the more we try to put them in those boxes, the more they escape the categorizing. And with regards to New York, I think there's a certain kind of energy in New York, for instance, that I do not necessarily find in Paris. But if I think about African cities, I would think about Douala or Lagos, there's also a certain kind of energy there, but without the feeling of loneliness. So I think the paradoxes that I see between, let's say, a place like New York and Douala, I see an energy, I see people looking for something. But in Douala, I could see a certain kind of belonging to a community while you're striving to achieve whatever you're trying to achieve. Whereas here, it's like you have this energy, but we're also very dislocated in existential terms. You know, our ability to relate or to disconnect with each other. This idea that you can be in a place with a lot of people, but you're totally disconnected. It reminds me of social media also. Yeah. How you have all those friends and those people that you're interacting with, but you don't even know your neighbors in your building, and you see each other, you're like zombies, you don't even say hello. Where I come from, you see people, you say hello when you come into a room. It's just like, so I think it also speaks to the commodification of the human in the West, which I found very interesting. What makes us human here? How is this city dehumanizing in many ways? Because you also see a lot of suffering. It's not just loneliness. Yeah. This idea of disregarding suffering on a daily basis because you have to go somewhere, or the suffering of the other becomes a problem to you because, let's say, there's violence somewhere. You can become a victim. So I think that's why New York, to me, is always a very intriguing place when I'm trying to reflect of what is becoming of the human. Because I also know some New Yorkers who were here way before then, compared to, it's like, oh, it used to be bad, but it was a different kind of bad. but we had community, we have this, we have that. So again, I'm really interested in reflecting on what kind of human beings are produced or created in New York. But there's also a very creative energy here. Yes. But there's also a nihilistic energy. To me, they're not opposite, like they feed into each other.
Can I just add? I'm sorry. Before I'm just interested in this because in terms of queer sexuality, that the dynamic in the city is about body. So we don't necessarily obviously know who we know, but between queers, we talk about this in class quite a bit, the look. We can look and we know, we connect, right? So we don't have to have a conversation, but there's a knowing, right? And this happens on the subway. This is what we call cruising.
Yeah, but that happens also with black people when they find themselves in a white space. You don't
Yes.
have to say, but to me, I will have to prometize that kind of connection. Is it a connection from a place of, I see you, you see me, but we're in this space where maybe we don't belong or we belong? To me, that's very different from being in the public market in Lomé or Douala, where, you know, I don't have, everybody looks like me. Therefore, you know, but what you're saying, I can also see how queer African folks in the context of Africa, they also have a certain language. So to me, I will always prometize what kind of connection are we talking about, in what space and in what context. But I totally understand what you're talking about.
And Fernando, to follow up with you, what kind of disconnections and connections do you think New York queer life provides?
Well, I can say I was born in Ecuador, and because of that, I've always felt that I do not necessarily fit in any society that I've ever lived. I've never felt completely like I am part of any standard. Because in Ecuador, yeah, I was part of, I guess, what you could call the majority. I was, yeah, there. But I felt as a queer kid that I did not share the values of everybody else, including my family, including school, anything. So when I moved to the United States, New York City, it was also tough because there I was still queer. That would never go away, of course. But then I found myself all of a sudden becoming racialized, and I found out that I was Latino, you know, because in Ecuador I was not a Latino, I was just a person. But here, oh, you're Latino and you're queer. So I found myself navigating two different waters. And so because of that, I guess the city and being a foreign person in this giant jungle is a huge image of my kind of writing, the kind of images that I like. Because, yeah, loneliness, just like you said, it's not necessarily a bad thing. But it could also be an impulse that creates and gives creativity, because when you're lonely and you don't have a lot of people to bother you or do things, you could also be really productive, and it's been my case. Being lonely has made a lot of things happen, possibly including this film, because I was just, hey, I have the free time to do things. So yeah, loneliness could have great benefit, but yeah, in the city, I've always been someone who's not from here. I'm that person who's from nowhere. And it's okay. I now embrace it.
And for Fernando and everyone here, what role do you think the City University has, not necessarily in the films that will be shown here, but on your work that you're working on now? The role of the City University in your teaching and your making art.
This very thing, this very conversation, this engagement. I mean, because I'm hearing these other perspectives to make me think about the perspectives that I have been generating in my thought about just the city, but also the experience of the bodies in the city. And I think it's raised a very interesting question here about the power of the look, right, in these spaces, the sense of our difference as we look at someone, and then how we can connect, disconnect. I find this particular university, City University, because it's such a mix of people, allows for these questions to come to the fore.
I think, yeah, it's great to be part of something, but I also have found out that I need to take initiative. People won't necessarily give you something. Just, oh, you're here, take it. You gotta search for things. Now, I don't know if that's everybody's experience, and sometimes I tend to question, is it because I'm queer that I'm not being given a chance? So yeah, so because of that, I've make sure that I'm always, excuse me, can I do this? So yeah, But CUNY, what I love about CUNY is that when you ask, and if you keep asking, yeah, you possibly can get things. And like GC Filmmakers, this event, it's a great example. I wanted to do something like that, and I found a way to achieve it. It wasn't just given to me. I applied. I asked around. But yeah, there are a lot of people here who can help and give you and lend you a hand. But you gotta go for your own initiatives.
What I appreciate the most about CUNY is the ability to engage diverse group of people. And I'm not just talking about gender, race, or sexuality. I'm even talking about age groups. You know, to have somebody who's your father's age in a seminar, who, you know, when you're talking about, I don't know, the 70s, Black Power, somebody who actually lived it, and to have people in the classroom who could be his or her grandchildren. And also me coming from this perspective where at the end of the day, yes, I'm Black in the US, but I'm also an immigrant. So what kind of conversation we able to generate in those spaces? And I've been living in the US since 2001. I have to say that those conversations can only happen in CUNY because of the nature of the city and the nature of the university. So, and I don't take that for granted because it totally shifts the quality of the conversation. When you're teaching in a predominantly white college or university, you're kind of catering to the students. But when you're in a classroom where people are coming from Ecuador or Venezuela, first generation college students, so I mean, people were born and raised in New York but didn't know that much about what was happening in Harlem. People, it's just very inspiring, even in terms of your teaching, your methodology, and when you think about the kind of work that you want to create. And me, I'm obsessed with the diversity of perspectives. How do we bring more people to the table instead of prioritizing some people at the table? And I think CUNY to me is the space for that.
Thank you, everyone. That's all we have time for today. Thank you to our amazing guests. Thank you also to the crew at CUNY TV Presents, especially Jose Luis Orbegozo, who came to a screening and envisioned it on television. And congratulations to Fernando Vieira for coming up with the idea of GC Filmmakers. I hope everyone at home enjoyed today's conversation. Please spread the word about GC Filmmakers. Look out for their films, see them perform on stage, and read their books, too. So leave your social media alone for a while, mute your phone, get your popcorn popping, and get ready to focus on the screen, no matter what kind of screen you are using. Regardless of the size of the moving image, it's all cinema.